I'm Colonel Ava Reiner, 38 years old, and I earned my command through 15 years of quiet, unbroken work in Air Force intelligence. For years, I did everything to make my father proud, served flawlessly, earned commendations, led missions that saved lives. But at his retirement ceremony, he mocked me in front of the entire base, calling me a disappointment to the uniform. A few minutes later, a four-star general took the podium and announced that I'd been chosen to replace him. That moment changed everything. Have you ever been undervalued or humiliated by someone you spent years trying to earn respect from? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being dismissed, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and what it really means to earn your place in the uniform. What came next might surprise you. I stood in the back of the base auditorium at Ramstein Air Force Base, watching the stage crew adjust the podium for my father's retirement ceremony. The room smelled like floor polish and that particular blend of aftershave that seemed standard issue for senior officers. I'd helped coordinate the logistics, seating arrangements, security clearances, the reception timeline, but I kept my distance from the actual program. This was his show, not mine. Don't hover, Lieutenant Colonel. My father's voice cut across the room. Colonel Marcus Reiner stood near the front row, reviewing his speech notes with the same intensity he'd once used to inspect my academy dorm room. This isn't your show. Just ensuring everything's ready, sir. I kept my tone professional neutral. We both knew how to play this game in public. He turned back to his conversation with a cluster of retired officers, men who'd served with him in Iraq and Afghanistan. Their laughter carried across the empty seats. I caught fragments, something about my bookworm tendencies, how I'd always had my nose in intelligence reports rather than leading troops in the field. One of them, a retired brigadier general named Patterson, glanced my way with an uncomfortable expression before quickly looking away. Major Ethan Cole appeared at my elbow, tablet in hand. Colonel Reiner, we've got confirmation from General Pierce's office. He'll arrive at 1700 hours, 30 minutes before the ceremony starts. Thank you, Major. I scanned his checklist. And the video tribute? Loaded and tested. 7 minutes, just like the Colonel requested. Ethan hesitated. Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, you've done excellent work pulling this together on such short notice. I appreciated the sentiment, even if we both knew my father would never acknowledge it. 2 weeks ago, when he learned I'd been assigned to coordinate his retirement ceremony, he'd called me directly. Not to thank me, but to remind me that he expected military precision, not the kind of desk work efficiency you intelligence types are known for. The comment still stung. I'd spent 15 years in the Air Force, the last 8 in increasingly senior intelligence positions. I'd deployed to Afghanistan, led classified operations, briefed generals and cabinet members. My officer evaluation reports were immaculate. Last year, I'd been selected for battalion command, a position typically reserved for officers being groomed for colonel. None of it mattered to him. Captain Maya Torres, one of my staff intelligence officers, approached with her usual brisk efficiency. Ma'am, the seating chart's been updated. General Pierce requested we reserve the front row for the OSIXS and above. Done. I made a note. What about parking? Secured. We've got spaces allocated by rank, with overflow for retired personnel. She lowered her voice. Colonel Reiner asked me to move your assigned seat to the back row. Said he didn't want family mixing with the official party. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, but kept my expression neutral. That's fine. Make the change. Maya's eyes flashed with something like anger, but she nodded and walked away. I wondered how many of my subordinates had witnessed these small humiliations over the years. How many had drawn their own conclusions about my father's opinion of my career. The truth was, our relationship had been deteriorating for years. It started long before I joined the Air Force, back when I was a kid moving from base to base, trying to meet his impossible standards. Perfect grades weren't enough. Varsity sports weren't enough. Even making the Academy's superintendent's list for academic excellence my sophomore year had earned only a brief nod and a comment about not letting it go to my head. But the real fracture came after my deployment to Bagram. I'd been the intel flight commander for a joint special operations task force. We'd identified a network of IED suppliers operating along the Pakistani border, tracked their movements, and coordinated with ground elements to interdict their supply lines. The operations saved lives, potentially dozens of them. My squadron earned a meritorious unit award, and I received a Bronze Star. My father called it desk-driven luck. Said any competent analyst with good sources could have done the same thing. When I pointed out that I'd personally coordinated with ground commanders and made real-time decisions that affected tactical operations, he'd shrugged. You were in an air-conditioned TOC, Ava. That's not command. That's management. That's when I realized he would never see me as anything but a disappointment. Not because I'd failed, but because I'd succeeded in a way he didn't respect. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Worth entered the auditorium, still wearing his Navy service dress blues from some earlier event. He'd been one of my father's favorite junior officers back when Dad commanded the 42nd Intelligence Group, the same unit I now worked for, though in a different capacity. Worth had since transferred to a joint assignment at Supreme Allied Command. Ava. He nodded respectfully. We'd served together briefly in Germany. Good to see you. Hell of a thing, coordinating your own father's retirement. Someone had to do it. I glanced at my father, who was demonstrating some tactical maneuver with his hands to an amused audience. He deserves a proper send-off. Worth followed my gaze. He's proud of you, you know. Even if he doesn't show it. I'd heard variations of this before from well-meaning officers who wanted to smooth over the obvious tension. They meant well, but they hadn't heard the private conversations. Hadn't been told, repeatedly, that my achievements were the result of affirmative action promotions or political correctness run amok. Hadn't watched him actively block my transfer to a command position 2 years ago, claiming I wasn't ready, while endorsing male officers with less experience. I'm sure he is, I said, because there was no point in explaining otherwise. Worth shifted uncomfortably. For what it's worth, you've earned every bit of your success. Anyone who's worked with you knows that. Appreciate it, Commander. He left to join the growing crowd of officers near the stage. I checked my watch, 16:45 hours. 15 minutes until General Pierce arrived, 45 until the ceremony began. Everything was ready. The program was flawless, the logistics were solid, and my father would get the retirement he deserved. I just wished I felt something other than this hollow sense of duty. Somewhere beneath the professional competence and military bearing, I'd once been a daughter who desperately wanted her father's approval. Who'd joined the Air Force partly because I thought it might finally make him proud. That daughter was gone now, replaced by a lieutenant colonel who understood that some validations would never come. Some relationships were broken beyond repair, and the only dignity left was in fulfilling your obligations with grace. My father laughed at something one of his friends said, then glanced my way. Our eyes met for a brief second. His expression didn't change, not hostile, not warm, just blank. Then he turned away and continued his story. I went back to my checklist. There was still work to do. The ceremony began at 17:30 hours with military precision. The auditorium was packed, active duty officers, retirees, senior enlisted personnel, even a few civilians from the base community. I'd taken my assigned seat in the back row, far from the stage, where I could see everything but remain essentially invisible. General Harlan Pierce arrived exactly on time, his 4 stars gleaming under the auditorium lights. He was a man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of command presence that made junior officers instinctively straighten their posture. I'd briefed him several times over the past year on intelligence matters. He was sharp, demanding, but fair, everything a senior officer should be. The color guard posted the colors, we all stood for the national anthem, and then the ceremony proper began. The master of ceremonies, a colonel from wing headquarters, delivered the opening remarks. Then came the video tribute, 7 minutes of my father's career highlights, from his commissioning at the academy to his various command positions, deployments, awards. The editing was excellent. It told the story of a distinguished career, and it was true mostly. My father had served his country with dedication and competence. What the video didn't show were the casualties of his ambition, the junior officers he'd crushed for minor mistakes, the family he'd neglected in pursuit of the next assignment, the daughter he'd never quite forgiven for not being the son he'd wanted. When the video ended, my father took the podium. He looked sharp in his service dress uniform, ribbons arranged in perfect rows, colonel's eagles polished to a high shine. For a moment, I remembered being 7 years old, watching him prepare for some formal event, thinking he was the most impressive person in the world. "Thank you all for being here," he began. His voice was strong, confident. 32 years ago, I raised my right hand and swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Today, I'm here to say that it's been the greatest honor of my life. The speech was good. He talked about his early days as a second lieutenant, about deployments to Bosnia and Iraq, about the officers and enlisted personnel he'd served with over the decades. He told war stories that had the audience laughing, shared moments of reflection that seemed genuinely moving. He thanked his commanders, his peers, his subordinates. He didn't mention me. Not once. I sat perfectly still, face neutral, as if this was exactly what I'd expected. Because it was. Of course, he continued, his tone shifting slightly, a career like mine requires sacrifices. Personal sacrifices. Family sacrifices. He paused for effect, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I've made my share of mistakes along the way, but I've always tried to uphold the standards of this uniform, to set an example for the next generation. He looked out into the audience, and I knew what was coming before his eyes found mine. I have one regret, though. His expression was almost apologetic, almost sad. My daughter, Lieutenant Colonel Ava Reiner, is here tonight. All brains, no backbone. She's been nothing but a disappointment to the uniform. The words hit like physical blows. The audience's laughter was awkward, uncertain, some people genuinely amused, others clearly uncomfortable. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, something broke. Not because I believed what he'd said, but because he'd said it here now, in front of everyone. This wasn't a private criticism or a family disagreement. This was public humiliation, delivered from a position of authority, designed to diminish everything I'd accomplished. I saw Captain Torres turn in her seat, her face flushed with anger. Major Cole looked stunned. Commander Worth had his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. And General Pierce had gone very, very still. My father continued his speech as if he'd just made a harmless joke. He talked about his retirement plans, about golf and travel. The audience gradually relaxed, the moment passing into uncomfortable memory. When he finished, there was strong applause. He'd earned it, objectively. 32 years of service deserved recognition. But I would never forget what he'd done. The Master of Ceremonies returned to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have General Harlan Pierce, Commander of Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, here to deliver remarks and present Colonel Reiner's retirement certificate." General Pierce stood, buttoned his uniform jacket, and walked to the podium with measured steps. My father stood beside him, smiling, ready to accept his accolades. The general began with the standard remarks, thanking my father for his service, noting his various assignments and accomplishments. His voice was professional, even warm. But I'd briefed Pierce enough times to recognize the steel beneath the courtesy. "Colonel Reiner has served with distinction," Pierce said. "His contributions to Air Force intelligence have been significant. He's led units through challenging times, deployed to combat zones, and maintained high standards of performance." My father nodded, accepting the praise. Then Pierce paused. The pause stretched just long enough to become noticeable. He glanced at his notes, then set them aside. "However," he said quietly, "I would be remiss if I didn't address something that was said a few moments ago." The room went silent. My father's smile flickered. "With all due respect, Colonel Reiner." Pierce's voice was calm but carried absolute authority. "Lieutenant Colonel Ava Reiner has not been a disappointment to this uniform. She has honored it." I stopped breathing. 11 months ago, Pierce continued, a selection board met to determine who would assume command of the 42nd Intelligence Group upon Colonel Reiner's retirement. The board reviewed dozens of qualified officers. They examined records, performance evaluations, deployment histories, and leadership potential. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the audience until it found me in the back row. Lieutenant Colonel Reiner was their unanimous choice. She's been selected to replace you, Colonel. She'll assume command of the 42nd Intelligence Group effective next month. The auditorium erupted. Not with applause, with gasps, murmurs, shocked whispers. This wasn't how these ceremonies worked. This kind of announcement came through official channels, not as a surprise reveal at a retirement ceremony. My father's face drained of color. His carefully constructed smile collapsed into something between shock and fury. Pierce wasn't finished. Lieutenant Colonel Reiner distinguished herself in Afghanistan, earning a Bronze Star for her leadership under combat conditions. She's briefed the Secretary of Defense, coordinated operations that saved American lives, and demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical precision and steady leadership that modern warfare requires. He paused. She has backbone, Colonel. She just doesn't feel the need to announce it. The general gestured toward me. Colonel Reiner, would you please come forward? For a moment, I couldn't move. Then training took over. I stood, smoothed my uniform jacket, and walked down the center aisle. Every eye in the auditorium followed me. I kept my gaze forward, shoulders back, pace measured and professional. When I reached the stage, General Pierce extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the firmness of his grip, the weight of what he'd just done. Congratulations, Colonel Select Reiner, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Thank you, sir. My father stood 3 feet away, frozen. Our eyes met, and I saw everything in his expression: shock, betrayal, rage, and, underneath it all, something that might have been recognition. He'd spent years dismissing my achievements, and now he'd been publicly contradicted by a 4-star general. The audience rose to their feet. The applause started slowly, then built. Captain Torres was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Major Cole had tears in his eyes. Even some of my father's old colleagues were applauding, faces carefully neutral, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. General Pierce handed my father his retirement certificate and shadow box, completing the ceremony with professional courtesy. My father accepted them mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. As we walked off the stage, he leaned close enough that only I could hear. "This isn't over," he whispered. I looked at him with all the calm I'd learned over 15 years of military service. "Yes, sir," I said. "It is." I didn't attend the reception. After the ceremony ended, I walked directly to my quarters in the officer housing complex, changed out of my uniform, and sat in the dark for an hour, trying to process what had happened. My phone buzzed constantly, texts from Maya, Ethan, other officers offering congratulations or expressing shock at how the announcement had been made. I ignored them all. Someone knocked on my door around 2100 hours. I considered not answering, but the knock came again, more insistent. It was General Pierce, now in his service dress uniform rather than full ceremonial blues. "May I come in, Colonel?" I stepped aside, suddenly very aware that my apartment was small and cluttered with intelligence reports I'd been reviewing. "Of course, sir." I apologize for the don't. He waved off my concern and took a seat on my government-issue sofa. "I'm not here for a white glove inspection." I sat across from him, waiting. "You handled yourself well tonight," Pierce said. "Under circumstances that would have destroyed lesser officers." "Thank you, sir. I want to be clear about something." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "That announcement was not scheduled. It wasn't approved by protocol. I made a command decision in the moment, and I'll face whatever consequences come from that. But I want you to understand why I did it." I'd been wondering about that. Public humiliation, even of a retiring colonel, was career-risking behavior for a general. "Your father," Pierce continued, "is a competent officer. He's served honorably. But he represents a generation of leadership that the Air Force is moving past. The kind of leadership that values bravado over analysis, that sees intelligence work as somehow less than command that." He paused. That can't accept that a woman can be as capable as any man in uniform. I didn't respond. What could I say? I've watched you for 3 years, Colonel. I've seen you brief the Joint Chiefs with more poise than officers twice your age. I've watched you mentor junior officers, build teams, handle crises with analytical precision. You're exactly what we need in senior leadership positions. He met my eyes. But until tonight, I didn't realize how much your father had undermined you. How much poison he'd spread about your career. Sir, I don't think, when you applied for command of the 364th Intelligence Squadron 2 years ago, do you know who blocked your application? I went very still. I'd suspected, but I'd never had confirmation. Your father submitted a formal letter to the selection board claiming you lacked the maturity and leadership presence for command. He cited your tendency toward bookish analysis rather than decisive action. He convinced 2 other board members to vote against you. Pierce's voice was hard. That position went to a male major with 3 years less experience than you. The room felt too small suddenly. I stood, walked to the window, looked out at the darkened base. I found out about it 6 months later, Pierce continued. Too late to fix it. But I made sure it wouldn't happen again. When the position for the 42nd Intelligence Group came open, I personally oversaw the selection process. And you were the clear choice. Why didn't you tell me? My voice was quieter than I intended. Because you needed to earn it on your own merit, not as a sympathy appointment. And you did. Every board member agreed you were the best candidate, and none of them knew about my involvement until after the vote. I turned back to face him. But tonight I couldn't stay silent. Not after what he said in front of the entire base. Not after he tried to publicly diminish your achievements one last time. Pierce stood. I won't apologize for defending an officer who's earned her position. And I won't tolerate a senior officer undermining someone's career because of personal prejudice. We stood there in the dim light of my apartment, and I realized that this man, this general I'd briefed dozens of times, who'd always been professional and distant, had just taken a significant career risk on my behalf. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Just be the leader I know you are. Command the 42nd with the same excellence you've brought to every assignment. Prove that the selection board made the right choice. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Colonel? What your father said tonight, all brains, no backbone. Yes, sir. He was half right. You do have exceptional intelligence. But you also have more backbone than he'll ever understand. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. He opened the door. Get some rest. You've got a command to prepare for. After he left, I sat back down and finally looked at my phone. 43 messages. Most were congratulatory, some were concerned. A few were from journalists who'd somehow already heard about the incident. One was from my father, "We need to talk." I deleted it without responding. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the organizational chart for the 42nd Intelligence Group. 237 personnel. 5 operational flights. 3 deployed locations. Annual budget of $83 million. It was a major command position, the kind that colonels competed for. The kind that would define the next phase of my career. I thought about my father's words, all brains, no backbone. He'd meant it as an insult, a final dismissal of everything I'd achieved. But as I reviewed the faces and names of the people I'd soon command, I realized he'd given me something else entirely, a challenge. A chance to prove that analytical thinking and decisive leadership weren't opposites. That quiet competence was its own form of strength. My phone rang. My mother, calling from their home in Colorado Springs. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever she wanted to say about tonight, I wasn't ready to hear it. We'd never been particularly close. She'd spent my childhood managing my father's career from behind the scenes, hosting the right parties, making the right connections. In her own way, she'd been as critical of my choices as he was, just quieter about it. Another text came through, this one from Commander Worth. Your father left the reception early. FYI, most of his old colleagues think Pierce did the right thing. You've got support you might not realize. That was something, at least. I went back to the organizational chart, started reading through recent performance reports, operational summaries, intelligence products. If I was going to take command in 30 days, I needed to understand the unit's current state, its strengths and weaknesses, its culture. The work helped. It always did. When emotions got complicated, when personal relationships fractured, there was always the mission. Always the next briefing to prepare, the next operation to coordinate, the next problem to solve. My father had taught me that much, even if he'd never meant to. I grew up on military bases, which meant I never really had a hometown. Fort Bragg, Ramstein, Langley, back to Ramstein, then Colorado Springs when my father took a staff position at NORAD. 2 years per assignment, sometimes less. New schools, new friends, new quarters that all looked vaguely the same. My father was always in uniform, even at home in some ways. Every morning began with inspections, bed made with hospital corners, shoes polished, room clean enough to pass a white glove test. When I was 8, he found a sock on my floor and made me do 20 push-ups. When I couldn't complete them, he told me I'd never make it in the real Air Force. I don't remember him ever saying he loved me. I remember him saying I'd scored well on a test, or that my posture had improved, or that I'd completed a task satisfactorily. Praise in my father's house was measured in the absence of criticism. My mother tried to soften things in her way. She'd explain that Daddy was under stress, that command was demanding, that he showed love through high standards. But she also made it clear that my job was to meet those standards, not complain about them. I learned early that emotion was weakness. Crying was unacceptable. Fear was something to overcome through discipline. And affection was earned through achievement. So I achieved. I excelled in school because failure meant disappointment. I played soccer because team sports taught discipline. I studied for the SATs until I scored in the 98th percentile because anything less would have been inadequate. When it came time for college, there was never any discussion about where I'd go. The Air Force Academy was the only option that made sense. I didn't particularly want to join the military. I'd thought about studying international relations, maybe working for the State Department. But my father's expectations were clear, and I'd spent 18 years learning that his approval, however rarely given, was what mattered. The academy was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just the physical training or the academic rigor, but the constant pressure to prove myself in an environment where women still had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. My father called every Sunday to review my performance. When I made the dean's list, he asked why I wasn't on the superintendent's list. When I made the superintendent's list, he asked about my physical fitness scores. During my junior year, I chose intelligence as my career field. My father called it the easy route desk work for people who couldn't handle real command. He wanted me in operations, flying aircraft or leading combat units. I tried to explain that modern warfare depended on intelligence, that information dominance was crucial, that analytical work was intellectually demanding and strategically vital. He didn't understand. Or didn't want to. After graduation, I was assigned to the 480th Intelligence Wing at Langley. My father was at Ramstein then, commanding a wing. We'd email occasionally, stilted professional correspondence that never touched on anything personal. When I told him about my first deployment to Bagram, he responded with advice about not embarrassing the family name. Afghanistan changed me. Not in the dramatic ways war changes infantry soldiers, but in subtler ways. I learned that intelligence work could mean life or death. That the analysts studying targeting packages and communications intercepts were making decisions that saved lives or cost them. That responsibility was heavier than I'd imagined. I was the intel flight commander for a joint special operations task force. We tracked Taliban movement patterns, identified IED networks, coordinated with ground units to interdict supply routes. The work was 18-hour days in a climate-controlled TOC, staring at screens and analyzing data, briefing commanders and making recommendations that affected tactical operations. One night, we'd identified a convoy of vehicles moving toward a known Taliban stronghold. Pattern of life analysis suggested they were carrying weapons or explosives. I had to make a call, recommend engagement or continue surveillance. The ground commander was asking for my assessment with attack helicopters already in position. I reviewed the intelligence one more time. The vehicles matched known smuggling routes. Communications intercepts mentioned a delivery that night, but there was a school compound 200 meters from the intercept point. I recommended they interdict the convoy before it reached the compound, using precision engagement to minimize collateral damage. The ground commander trusted my analysis. The strike was successful, 12 Taliban fighters killed, a vehicle loaded with explosives destroyed, 0 civilian casualties. For that operation and others like it, I received a Bronze Star. When I called my father to tell him, his first question was whether I'd actually been in danger or just managing the operation from safety. That's when our relationship fractured beyond repair. Not broken suddenly, but eroded to the point where I realized no achievement would ever be enough. No medal, no performance evaluation, no promotion would make him see me as anything but inadequate. I stopped calling. Started focusing on my career not to gain his approval, but because the work itself mattered. Because the analysts I supervised deserved good leadership. Because the intelligence products we produced affected real operations and real lives. Over the next 8 years, I moved up steadily. Captain to major. Major to lieutenant colonel. I commanded a flight, then supervised a squadron's intelligence operations. I briefed generals and cabinet members. I deployed twice more, once to Iraq and once to Africa. My officer evaluation reports were consistently in the top 5%, and my father's criticism became more pointed. He told colleagues I'd been promoted because of politics, that the Air Force was lowering standards to promote women. When I was selected for a prestigious fellowship at the National Intelligence University, he called it academic indulgence that would hurt my operational credibility. 2 years ago, when I applied for command of the 364th Intelligence Squadron, I thought I'd finally reached the point where my record spoke for itself. The position was competitive, but I had the experience, the evaluations, the recommendations. I was confident. The selection board rejected my application without explanation. I found out later, much later, that my father had intervened. That he'd written to the board claiming I wasn't ready. That his reputation and connections had been enough to sink my chances. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt something like relief. Because it meant I could stop trying to earn his approval. Could stop measuring my worth by his standards. Could focus entirely on being the officer I wanted to be, not the one he thought I should be. When General Pierce told me I'd been selected for the 42nd Intelligence Group, my first emotion wasn't joy. It was vindication. Proof that I'd earned my position despite my father's interference, not because of his legacy. And now, standing on the stage at his retirement ceremony while he publicly humiliated me, I realized the last tie had been cut. Whatever relationship we'd once had, father and daughter, mentor and protege, commander and subordinate, was finished. He'd made his choice. And I'd made mine. I would lead the 42nd Intelligence Group with the same analytical precision and quiet competence that had defined my career. I would prove that intelligence work was as vital as any combat command. And I would do it without his approval, without his blessing, without any acknowledgement that his opinion mattered. Because it didn't. Not anymore. The first week after the retirement ceremony was chaos. Word had spread across the Air Force that a 4-star general had publicly contradicted a retiring colonel and announced his daughter's selection for command. Some outlets were calling it a breakthrough moment for women in military leadership. Others suggested it was inappropriate and undermined good order and discipline. A few conspiracy theorists claimed General Pierce had engineered the whole thing as a political statement. I ignored all of it and focused on the transition. I had 30 days before assuming command, and I intended to use every minute. The 42nd Intelligence Group was headquartered at Ramstein with detachments in Qatar, Djibouti, and Germany. 237 personnel, including active duty officers, enlisted specialists, and civilian analysts. The unit's mission was providing intelligence support to European and African operations, everything from counterterrorism targeting to strategic assessments of Russian military movements. My predecessor, my father, had commanded the unit for 3 years. His leadership style had been traditional, top-down authority, emphasis on strict adherence to procedures, minimal tolerance for deviation from established protocols. The unit had performed adequately under his command, meeting benchmarks without exceeding them. I spent the first week reviewing every aspect of the organization. Performance metrics, operational reports, personnel evaluations, budget documentation. I met with each flight commander individually, asking about challenges, resources, morale. I visited the deployed locations, spoke with analysts and operators, observed briefings. What I found was a competent but cautious organization. People did their jobs well but rarely took initiative. Innovation was discouraged. Junior analysts were reluctant to challenge senior assessments, even when they had better information. During one visit to the targeting and analysis flight, I sat with a young captain named Sarah Brennan who was reviewing Russian troop movements near the Ukrainian border. Her analysis was sharp, identifying patterns that suggested a major exercise being used to mask operational preparations. But her report was hedged with qualifications and caveats. "Captain, this is excellent work," I said, reading her draft. "But why are you qualifying every conclusion?" She hesitated. Colonel Reiner preferred that we avoid definitive statements unless we had conclusive evidence. "And you don't have conclusive evidence?" "No, ma'am." "But the pattern analysis strongly suggests," then say that. Say pattern analysis strongly suggests and provide your confidence level. Don't hedge your expertise. I handed back the report. Intelligence work is about making assessments based on incomplete information. If we wait for conclusive evidence, we're already too late. She looked uncertain. Colonel Reiner used to say that analysts who overreach damage their credibility. I'd heard that before. It was one of my father's favorite criticisms, that I was too willing to make assessments without ironclad proof. But intelligence wasn't mathematics. It was structured analysis of imperfect information combined with experience and judgment. Your credibility comes from accurate analysis over time, not from being cautiously vague, I said. Revise this report with confidence. If you're wrong, we'll learn from it. If you're right, commanders will have the information they need. Word spread quickly. The new commander was different. More willing to trust her analysts. More interested in their assessments than in enforcing rigid procedures. Not everyone approved. Lieutenant Commander Worth, who'd been one of my father's protégés, requested a meeting my second week. "Colonel Reiner, may I speak freely?" "Always. There's concern among some of the senior staff that you're encouraging junior officers to be overly assertive in their analysis. That we're moving away from the disciplined, evidence-based approach that made this unit successful." I leaned back in my chair. "What do you think, Commander?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think your father built a solid organization with clear standards and reliable output. I also think the younger analysts seem more engaged since you took over. More willing to push their thinking. Those two things aren't contradictory." "No, ma'am. But change is always uncomfortable." "Noted. Is there anything else?" He stood to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, Colonel, what General Pierce said at the ceremony about you having backbone? He was right." After he left, I sat alone in my office, my father's old office, which I'd redecorated minimally, and thought about leadership. My father had led through authority and discipline. It worked after a fashion. People followed orders, met standards, maintained operational tempo. But they didn't innovate, didn't push boundaries, didn't bring their full capability to the mission because they were too focused on avoiding mistakes. I wanted something different. An organization where analysts felt empowered to make bold assessments, where initiative was rewarded, where intellectual rigor was valued over risk avoidance. But I also knew that changing a culture took time, and that every decision I made would be compared to how my father would have handled things. The comparison started almost immediately. When I reorganized the command structure to give flight commanders more autonomy, people whispered that I was undermining unity of command. When I instituted weekly innovation sessions where junior analysts could brief their ideas directly to me, people said I was creating chaos and bypassing the chain of command. I kept working, kept meeting with personnel, kept reviewing operations and making adjustments. 3 weeks into my preparation, my phone rang at 0200 hours. The watch officer, reporting a crisis, a CIA case officer in Syria had been compromised. His identity, cover, and location had been leaked through an intelligence breach. He had maybe 12 hours before hostile forces located him. The agency was requesting Air Force support for emergency exfiltration, and they needed targeting analysis of the route and enemy disposition. This was the kind of crisis that defined command. How I handled it would set the tone for my entire tenure. I called in my senior staff and set up a crisis action team. Within an hour, we had analysts working the problem from multiple angles. Captain Brennan was analyzing Russian and Syrian troop positions along potential exfiltration routes. Major Cole was coordinating with Joint Special Operations Command. Maya Torres was interfacing with CIA to confirm details and requirements. By 0600 hours, we had a comprehensive assessment. 3 potential routes, with confidence levels and risk factors for each. Recommendations for air support and coordination timing. Contingency plans if the primary route was compromised. I briefed General Pierce personally, then coordinated with the Joint Operations Center. The exfiltration went forward using our primary recommended route. The case officer was extracted safely with 0 casualties. Afterward, General Pierce called me directly. "Excellent work, Colonel. That's exactly the kind of rapid, precise analysis we need." But the real validation came from my team. Major Cole approached me the next day, exhaustion evident on his face. "Ma'am, I've been in this unit for 4 years. Under the previous commander, a crisis like this would have taken 18 hours to analyze. We'd have convened multiple working groups, reviewed every detail, hedged every conclusion. The case officer might have been killed while we were still drafting the initial assessment." "What changed?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "You trusted us to do our jobs. You gave flight commanders authority to make calls without checking with you first. You'd built a team that could move fast because we weren't afraid of making mistakes. That was the moment I knew the transition was working. Not because I'd done everything perfectly, but because my approach, trusting competent people, empowering decision-making, valuing speed and accuracy over risk avoidance, was producing results. My father called 3 days before I formally assumed command. I almost didn't answer, but professionalism won out. "Ava." His voice was stiff, formal. "I'm calling to wish you luck with the change of command." "Thank you." Silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, could imagine him sitting in his retirement home in Colorado, struggling with what to say. "I didn't mean." He stopped. "At the ceremony. I didn't expect General Pierce to tell the truth. I kept my voice neutral. To publicly acknowledge that I'd earned my position? You don't understand the position he put me in." "I understand perfectly, sir. You spent years undermining my career, and he called you out in front of everyone. That must have been uncomfortable." "I never undermined. You blocked my squadron command application. You told colleagues my promotions were political. You called my work desk-driven luck." My voice was calm, factual. "General Pierce told me everything." Another long silence. "I wanted you to be strong," he said finally. "I pushed you because I thought you pushed me because you couldn't accept that I succeeded in a way you didn't respect. Intelligence work. Analytical precision. Quiet leadership." I stood, walked to my window. "But I'm done trying to earn your approval. I'm done pretending your opinion matters. I'm taking command in 3 days, and I'm going to lead this unit my way. Not yours." "Ava, goodbye, Colonel." I hung up before he could respond. The change of command ceremony was held on a bright morning in late September, outdoors on the parade ground. The entire 42nd Intelligence Group was in formation, along with representatives from other units and senior leaders from across European command. General Pierce presided over the ceremony. The protocol was traditional. The outgoing commander passes the unit guidance to the general, who then passes it to the incoming commander. Except there was no outgoing commander. My father had already retired. So General Pierce held the guidance himself, which gave his remarks extra weight. "The 42nd Intelligence Group has a distinguished history of providing vital intelligence support to combat operations," he said, addressing the formation. Under Colonel Marcus Reiner's command, this unit maintained high standards and operational readiness. Today, we entrust that legacy to Colonel Ava Reiner. He turned to face me. "Colonel Reiner, You've earned this command through exceptional performance, demonstrated leadership, and unwavering commitment to excellence. I have every confidence that under your leadership, the 42nd Intelligence Group will not just maintain its standards, it will exceed them. He handed me the guidon. The unit was now mine. I gave my acceptance speech brief, focused, professional. I thanked General Pierce for his confidence, acknowledged my father's legacy without dwelling on it, and outlined my vision for the unit. More innovation. More empowerment. More trust in our analysts' expertise. Better intelligence products delivered faster to commanders who needed them. Intelligence work is often invisible, I said, looking at my formation. We don't lead troops into combat. We don't fly strike missions. But every operation depends on our analysis. Every tactical decision is informed by our assessments. We have tremendous responsibility, and I intend to ensure we meet it with precision, speed, and confidence. The ceremony ended with a pass in review. As my unit marched past, I saw faces I'd come to know over the past month: Captain Brennan, Major Cole, Captain Torres, Commander Worth. 237 people whose careers and missions now depended on my leadership. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. At the reception afterward, officers and civilians congratulated me. Some were genuinely warm, others professionally distant. I understood. Some of these people had served under my father for years. They were reserving judgment, waiting to see what kind of commander I would be. General Pierce pulled me aside near the end. Your father didn't attend. No, sir. That bothers you. It wasn't a question. Less than it would have a month ago. Good. He studied me for a moment. Ava, can I give you some advice? Of course, sir. The next 6 months will define your command. People are watching to see if you're as good as I said you were. If you're really different from your father, or just younger. If the selection board made the right choice. He smiled slightly. The pressure is going to be intense. I understand, sir. I know you do. But here's what you might not understand. You don't have to prove you're better than your father. You just have to be yourself. Lead the way you know is right, trust your instincts, and don't try to compete with his memory. His expression was serious. He built his career on being the toughest, most demanding commander in the room. You'll build yours on being the smartest and most trustworthy. Those are different legacies, and both have value. After he left, I stood alone on the parade ground, holding the unit guidon. The formation had dispersed, but I could still see the imprint of where they'd stood, 237 sets of bootprints in the gravel. My command. My responsibility. My chance to prove that quiet competence, analytical precision, and trust-based leadership could be just as effective as my father's iron discipline. I walked back to my headquarters building, the guidon over my shoulder, ready to begin. The first 6 months of command were brutal. Not because of any single crisis, but because of the constant pressure to prove myself while simultaneously running a complex intelligence organization. Every decision was scrutinized. Every innovation was questioned. Every time I deviated from my father's methods, someone suggested I was abandoning proven approaches for untested theories. In November, I restructured our targeting process to give analysts more direct contact with operational commanders. The old system had intelligence products flowing up through multiple approval layers before reaching the people who needed them. It was thorough but slow. I streamlined it, trusting senior analysts to brief commanders directly. Lieutenant Commander Worth warned me that I was risking quality control. Colonel Reiner always reviewed every product personally before it went out. It maintained consistency and prevented errors. It also created a bottleneck, I responded. And it sent the message that we didn't trust our analysts. I'd rather accept occasional errors in exchange for speed and analyst empowerment. The new system worked. Response times improved by 40%. Commanders got fresher intelligence. And analysts took more ownership of their products because they were briefing directly to the people who used them. But the critics remained. A colonel from Air Staff visited in December and wrote in his trip report that the 42nd was trending toward decentralized chaos under new leadership. General Pierce called me after reading the report. Are you concerned? About the criticism or the performance? Fair point. Performance metrics look excellent. But perception matters too. Sir, if I spend all my time managing perception, I won't have time to lead this unit. I kept my voice respectful but firm. I know some people think I'm too young, too inexperienced, or only got this job because you backed me. But the work speaks for itself. It does. Keep doing what you're doing. In January, we faced our first major test. Russian forces conducted a massive military exercise along the Estonian border, supposedly routine, but with unusual characteristics. My analysts identified anomalies, communication security measures beyond normal exercise protocols, deployment of systems typically reserved for actual operations, movement patterns that suggested positioning for rapid assault rather than training. The assessment was clear. Russia was using the exercise as cover for an operational deployment. If tensions escalated, they could transition from exercise to combat operations within hours. I briefed the assessment to European Command and recommended increased NATO readiness posturing. It was a bold call based on pattern analysis and inference rather than conclusive intelligence. Some senior officers pushed back. Are you certain, Colonel? Because if you're wrong, we'll have elevated an entire theater's readiness level for nothing. I'm not certain, sir. Intelligence is rarely certain. But I'm confident enough in the analysis to recommend action. They accepted my recommendation. NATO forces increased readiness. 3 days later, Russia escalated their rhetoric about Baltic states and moved additional forces forward. Our early warning allowed NATO to position forces that deterred further escalation. After it was over, the Yukon commander called personally. Colonel Reiner, your unit's assessment gave us the time we needed to respond effectively. Excellent work. That incident changed how people viewed my command. Suddenly, the criticism quieted. The questions about my leadership style became less frequent. Because we delivered when it mattered, and the results were undeniable. Captain Brennan, who developed much of the Russia analysis, approached me afterward. Ma'am, under the previous commander, I would have been too cautious to make that assessment. Too afraid of being wrong. What changed? You made it clear that you valued accurate analysis over safe analysis. That you'd rather we take informed risks than play it safe and miss important developments. She smiled. It's terrifying, but it's also why I joined intelligence. By spring, the 42nd had established a reputation as one of the most responsive and innovative intelligence units in theater. We'd supported 3 special operations missions, provided targeting analysis for 2 counterterrorism strikes, and delivered strategic assessments that influenced NATO policy. My leadership style had been validated through performance. And the comparison to my father's command, inevitable and constant, was now working in my favor. People stopped talking about whether I was as good as Colonel Reiner and started acknowledging that I'd brought something different and valuable to the unit. But the personal cost was high. I worked 16-hour days most weeks. I'd sacrificed any semblance of personal life. And the relationship with my father remained fractured. He'd called twice more over those months, once at Christmas, once on my birthday. Both times, the conversations were stiff and awkward. He'd ask about the unit, and I'd give brief professional updates. He'd mention retirement activities, and I'd respond politely. Neither of us addressed what had happened at his ceremony. In April, my mother called. Ava, I'm worried about your father. Is he ill? No, but he's isolated himself. Won't see old friends. Spends his days reading military history and watching cable news. She paused. He's not handling retirement well. I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't know what you expect me to do. Talk to him. Make peace with him. He's your father. He's also the man who spent years undermining my career and then publicly humiliated me at his retirement ceremony. Peace requires acknowledgement and apology, and I haven't received either. He's proud, Ava. He doesn't know how to apologize. Then he'll stay isolated. I'm not going to pretend everything's fine for the sake of his comfort. She sighed. You're as stubborn as he is. Yes, he taught me that. I hung up feeling guilty but resolute. I'd spent too many years trying to earn my father's approval. I wasn't going to spend my command trying to repair a relationship he'd broken. Instead, I focused on the mission. On my people. On building the kind of organization where analytical excellence and human leadership coexisted. where junior officers felt empowered to challenge assumptions, where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than career enders, where intelligence work was valued as highly as any combat mission. One evening, working late in my office, General Pierce stopped by unannounced. "Colonel, go home." I looked up from the briefing I was reviewing. "Sir, you're here past 2200 hours most nights. Your staff tells me you respond to emails at 0300. You're running yourself into the ground. The mission requires a commander who's sharp and sustainable, not burned out after 6 months." He sat down without being invited. "I see a lot of your father in you, Ava. The dedication, the perfectionism, the inability to delegate. But you're making the same mistake he did." I set down my pen. "What mistake?" "Thinking that leadership means doing everything yourself. That if you're not working harder than everyone else, you're not earning your position." He leaned forward. "Your father commanded through personal control. Every decision, every product, every detail ran through him. It worked, but it was exhausting and ultimately limiting. You're doing the same thing, just with a different leadership philosophy. So, what should I do differently? Trust your people the way you're asking them to trust themselves. Delegate more. Go home at reasonable hours. Model the sustainable leadership you want to see." He stood. "You've already proven you can do this job. Now prove you can do it for 20 more years without burning out." After he left, I sat in the quiet office and realized he was right. I'd been so focused on proving myself to the unit, to the Air Force, to my father's memory, that I'd forgotten that effective leadership wasn't about working the longest hours or reviewing every detail. It was about building systems and teams that functioned well even when you weren't in the room. The next morning, I implemented new policies. Flight commanders would make more decisions autonomously. I'd stop reviewing routine intelligence products unless specifically requested. I'd leave the office by 1900 hours unless there was an actual crisis. It felt wrong at first, like I was shirking responsibility. But within weeks, I noticed the difference. My staff was more confident. Decision-making was faster. And I was sleeping better, thinking more clearly, leading more effectively. My father appeared at the base 7 months into my command. No warning, no explanation. Just showed up at the security gate asking to speak with me. I was in a meeting when my executive officer interrupted. "Ma'am, there's someone in the lobby who insists on seeing you." "Who?" "Your father." The meeting went silent. Everyone knew the history, or enough of it to understand the significance. "Tell him I'll be available in 30 minutes. I finished the meeting with professional composure, but inside I was calculating. Why now? What did he want? And why couldn't he have called first? When I walked into the lobby, he was standing by the window in civilian clothes, khakis, and a polo shirt that made him look older and smaller than I remembered. Retired. Diminished. "Colonel." He straightened when he saw me, military bearings still automatic. "Sir, this is unexpected. I was in Germany for a veterans conference. Thought I'd stop by." He glanced around the headquarters building, his old command. "Place looks different. We've made some changes. I heard. Intelligence community newsletter mentioned your unit's performance during the Russian escalation. Said it was some of the best early warning analysis in theater." I waited, saying nothing. "Could we talk? Privately?" I led him to my office, his old office, and closed the door. He looked around at the changes I'd made, different furniture arrangement, updated technology displays, photos of my team rather than individual awards. "You've really made it yours," he said quietly. "That was the idea." He sat down without being invited, and I saw how much he'd aged in 7 months. The retirement that was supposed to be his victory lap had hollowed him out. "I've been following your command," he said. "Not officially. Just keeping track. Reading reports, talking to people who know people. That kind of thing. And you're doing well. Better than well." He met my eyes. "You were right. About the leadership approach. About trusting analysts. About empowering decision-making. The unit's performing at levels I never achieved." It should have felt like vindication. But mostly I just felt tired. "Why are you here, Dad?" He flinched at the familiar term. We hadn't used family names in years. "I came to apologize." The words came out rough, unpracticed. For what I said at my retirement ceremony. For the years before that. For blocking your command application. For the criticism. For never giving you credit for your achievements. You knew about the command application? Pierce told me. After the ceremony. Called me personally and told me exactly what I'd done to your career. He looked down at his hands. Said I'd let my ego destroy my relationship with my daughter and that I'd probably lost any chance to fix it. He was right. I know. He stood, walked to the window. I spent 32 years in uniform, Ava. Built my career on being the toughest, most demanding commander anyone had served under. It worked. I got promoted, got good assignments, earned respect. But somewhere along the way, I confused being tough with being effective. Confused control with leadership. You were effective. Your units performed well. They performed adequately. Yours performs excellently. He turned back to me. Because you lead differently. You trust people. You empower them. You've created an organizational culture that brings out their best work. I just enforced compliance. I didn't know what to say. This was the conversation I'd wanted for years, acknowledgement, validation, apology. But now that it was happening, I felt strangely disconnected. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. What I did at that ceremony, publicly humiliating you in front of your peers, there's no excuse for that. I let my ego and my insecurity turn me into someone I'm not proud of. Why did you do it? Because I was terrified. He said it simply, without deflection. Terrified that your success meant my approach had been wrong all along. That everything I'd built my career on, the hard discipline, the control, the toughness, was obsolete. That you were better at this than I ever was. I'm not better. I'm different. You're both. He smiled sadly. And that's what I couldn't accept. My daughter succeeding with a leadership style that contradicted everything I believed in. It felt like a rejection of me, of my legacy. So I rejected you first. We stood in silence. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of the headquarters building, people working, phones ringing, the hum of operations continuing regardless of our personal drama. I've spent 7 months in retirement thinking about my career, he said. About what I achieved and what I sacrificed. And I've realized that my greatest failure wasn't professional. It was personal. I have a daughter who's an exceptional officer and leader, and I spent years trying to diminish her instead of celebrating her. I needed you to be proud of me, I said quietly. For years, that's all I wanted. Your approval, your acknowledgement that I'd earned my place. And you withheld it deliberately. I know. It nearly broke me. The constant criticism, the subtle undermining, the public dismissals. I almost resigned my commission after you blocked my squadron command application. He looked stricken. I didn't know, because we stopped talking honestly years before that. We just went through the motions of a father-daughter relationship while you systematically tried to prove I didn't deserve my career. I'm sorry, Ava. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. I walked to my desk, sat down, suddenly exhausted. I don't know what you want from me. Forgiveness? Reconciliation? Permission to feel better about what you did. I want to know if there's any possibility of rebuilding our relationship. Not the way it was, that was broken from the start. But something new. Something honest. I don't know if that's possible. He nodded, accepting that. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. Genuinely, sincerely proud. You've achieved things I never could, led in ways I never imagined. You're a better officer than I was, and more importantly, you're a better person. He moved toward the door, and I realized he was actually leaving. Not demanding anything, not trying to force reconciliation, just stating his piece and going. Dad. He turned back. I need time to process this, to figure out if I can trust you again. But I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate the apology. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled slightly. Benefits of retirement. After he left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, thinking about legacy and leadership, about fathers and daughters, about the long, difficult work of repairing what's been broken. I didn't know if our relationship could be salvaged. But for the first time in years, I thought it might be worth trying. 1 year into my command, the Air Force held its annual Intelligence Awards ceremony at the Pentagon. The 42nd Intelligence Group was nominated in 3 categories, and I was required to attend as commander. I flew to Washington with mixed feelings. Award ceremonies had never been my priority. I cared more about mission execution than recognition. But this was important for the unit, for morale, for demonstrating that excellent work got acknowledged. The ceremony was held in a Pentagon auditorium filled with intelligence professionals from across the services. General Pierce was there, as were several other senior officers I'd briefed over the years. And sitting 3 rows back, unexpectedly, was my father. We'd spoken twice since his visit to Ramstein, brief phone conversations that were tentatively warmer than before but still careful. I hadn't told him I'd be here. He must have found out through his network of retired officers. The ceremony began with the usual protocol: color guard, national anthem, welcoming remarks. Then they started announcing awards. The 42nd Intelligence Group won Best Analytical Product for Captain Brennan's assessment of Russian military exercises. When they called our name, I stood with my team, proud of what they'd accomplished. Brennan accepted the trophy with a brief, nervous speech about teamwork and rigorous analysis. We won Best Intelligence Support to Operations for our work coordinating targeting analysis during a counterterrorism operation in North Africa. Major Cole accepted that award, his voice steady and professional. Then came the Commander's Award, recognition for the officer who demonstrated exceptional intelligence leadership over the past year. General Pierce took the podium to announce it. This award recognizes an officer who's transformed their organization through innovative leadership, analytical excellence, and unwavering commitment to mission success. He paused. This year's recipient took command of a solid but cautious organization and turned it into one of the most responsive and effective intelligence units in theater. I felt a tightness in my chest. I hadn't expected this. Under her leadership, the 42nd Intelligence Group provided early warning that deterred Russian aggression, supported critical special operations missions, and set new standards for intelligence responsiveness. More importantly, she's mentored the next generation of intelligence officers and demonstrated that trust-based leadership produces better results than control-based management. He looked directly at me. The Commander's Award for Intelligence Leadership goes to Colonel Ava Reiner. The applause was strong. I stood, momentarily disoriented, then walked to the stage on autopilot. General Pierce shook my hand and presented the trophy, a crystal eagle mounted on polished wood. "You've earned this," he said quietly. "Every bit of it." I gave the required acceptance speech, thanking my team, acknowledging General Pierce's mentorship, noting that awards reflect collective effort rather than individual achievement. The words came automatically while my mind was elsewhere. Because halfway through the speech, I saw my father. He was standing, applauding, and his eyes were wet. After the ceremony, people congratulated me, colleagues I'd worked with over the years, senior officers I'd briefed, subordinates who'd traveled to Washington for the event. I accepted their praise with professional humility, but I kept scanning the crowd for my father. He was waiting by the exit, apart from the crowd. "Congratulations, Colonel." His voice was formal, but his expression wasn't. "Thank you for coming." I wouldn't have missed it. He gestured to a quieter corner, away from the crowd. "Can we talk for a minute?" We found a bench in the Pentagon's hallway, sitting side by side like we hadn't in years. "I've been thinking about legacy," he said. "About what we leave behind when our careers are over. For years, I thought my legacy was the units I commanded, the operations I oversaw, the standards I maintained. But sitting in that auditorium today, watching you receive that award, I realized I was wrong." "What do you mean?" "My real legacy isn't what I did. It's you. A daughter who took everything I taught her about dedication and discipline, rejected the parts that were toxic, and built a leadership style that's better than mine ever was." He looked at me. "You're my legacy, Ava. And I'm finally starting to be proud of that." Something inside me that had been tense for years loosened slightly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or for things to go back to how they were," he continued. "But I'd like to be part of your life again. As a father, not as a critic. Someone you can call when you've had a bad day, or share good news with, or just talk to without wondering if I'm judging your career choices. That's going to take time. I know. but I have time now. That's one benefit of retirement. I can finally focus on what actually matters. We sat in silence for a moment, two Air Force officers, one active, one retired, trying to bridge a gap that had taken years to form. I could use someone to talk to, I said carefully. Someone who understands the pressures of command, the weight of responsibility. Not a mentor or a critic, just family. I'd like that. His voice was rough. I'd like that a lot. Captain Brennan found us eventually, trophy in hand, asking about photos for the unit's social media. My father stepped aside to let me handle it, but as I posed with my team, I caught him watching. Not with the critical assessment I'd grown used to, but with something that looked like genuine pride. Later, at the reception, he approached General Pierce. I watched from across the room as they talked, two senior officers with decades of shared experience. At one point, Pierce gestured toward me, and my father nodded, his expression serious. When Pierce walked past me later, he paused. Your father just apologized to me for putting me in a difficult position at his retirement ceremony. Said he understood why I did what I did, and that he was grateful I stood up for you when he wouldn't. He said that. He did. Also said he's been reading everything he can about modern intelligence leadership, and he finally understands why your approach works better than his did. Pierce smiled. People can change, Colonel. Even stubborn old colonels. I'm learning that, sir. The evening ended with my team celebrating at a nearby restaurant. My father joined us, initially awkward but gradually relaxing as my officers treated him with respect but not deference. Captain Brennan asked him about his Bosnia deployment. Major Cole compared notes about different command philosophies. By the end of the night, he was laughing at stories about my leadership quirks, my tendency to reorganize briefing slides, my habit of reading intelligence reports at 0500 hours, my insistence on calling people by first names in private settings. She gets that from her mother, he said, smiling. The early mornings and the informality. From me she just got the stubbornness. And the analytical mind, Maya Torres added. And the unshakable composure under pressure. He looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen, unguarded affection. Yeah, those two. As people left, my father and I walked through the Pentagon's parking lot toward his rental car. Thank you for being here, I said. It meant more than I expected it to. Thank you for letting me be part of your success. Even from a distance. He unlocked his car, then turned back. Ava, I know I can't undo the years of criticism and doubt. But I want you to know, you were never a disappointment. Never. I was just too blind and insecure to see your brilliance for what it was. I'm beginning to believe that. Good. Because it's true. He got into his car, then rolled down the window. Call me sometime? Not about work. Just to talk. I will. He drove away, and I stood alone in the parking lot holding my award, thinking about how far we'd both come. How much had been broken and was slowly being repaired. How leadership and legacy and family were all more complicated than I'd imagined at 22. My phone buzzed. General Pierce, sending a message. Your unit's performance this year has been outstanding. Keep doing what you're doing. And for what it's worth, your father seems different. Humbler. Maybe there's hope for reconciliation. I texted back, maybe. We'll see. Because that was honest. I didn't know if my father and I could fully rebuild our relationship. Too much damage, too many years of hurt. But for the first time, I thought we might be able to build something new. Not the father-daughter relationship I'd wanted as a kid, but something more mature, two military professionals who respected each other and happened to share DNA. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I stand in the auditorium at Balling Air Force Base, watching my newest captain receive her promotion. Her name is Lieutenant Jordan Hayes, and 6 months ago she was a lieutenant running tactical intelligence operations in my unit. Today she's a captain, and next month she'll take command of an intelligence flight in Korea. She's brilliant, analytical, decisive, confident but not arrogant. Everything a good intelligence officer should be. During her promotion ceremony, I pin on her captain's bars and tell her she's earned this through exceptional performance. What I don't tell her is that I see myself in her. The same drive to prove herself, the same analytical precision, the same quiet competence that doesn't need to announce itself. And I hope her path will be easier than mine was. That she'll serve in an Air Force that values intelligence work as much as any combat mission. That she won't spend years trying to earn validation from someone who can't give it. After the ceremony, my father approaches. He's become a regular visitor to my change of command ceremonies and promotions, not hovering or offering unsolicited advice, just present. Supporting from a distance. She reminds me of you, he says, watching Captain Hayes celebrate with her family. That's what I was thinking. You're a good mentor. Better than I was. I learned from your mistakes, I say, but without edge. It's just truth now. Fair enough. He smiles. Are we still on for dinner next week? Your mother's insisting on cooking. I'll be there. It's been 2 years since my father's retirement ceremony. 2 years since General Pierce announced my selection in front of everyone. 2 years of commanding the 42nd Intelligence Group, of proving that my leadership style works, of earning respect on my own terms. My relationship with my father isn't perfect. We're still navigating what it means to be family after years of professional antagonism. But we're honest now. When he offers advice, I can tell him if I disagree. When I make decisions he wouldn't have made, he asks about my reasoning instead of criticizing my judgment. And slowly, painfully, we're building something that resembles a healthy father-daughter relationship. My phone buzzes. General Pierce, asking if I can brief the Secretary of Defense next week on Russian intelligence operations. I confirm, then forward the request to my staff to begin preparations. This is my life now. Commander of a major intelligence organization. Mentor to junior officers. Daughter trying to reconcile with her father. Air Force officer building a career on competence rather than ego. My father was right about one thing at his retirement ceremony. I am all brains. I've built my success on analytical precision, on careful assessment of complex problems, on intellectual rigor applied to national security challenges. But he was wrong about the backbone. I've proven that quiet strength is still strength. That thoughtful leadership is still leadership. That you don't need to be the loudest or toughest person in the room to command respect. I walk out of the auditorium into bright sunlight, my uniform crisp, shoulders back, head high. In 3 months, I'll pin on full colonel. In 5 years, maybe brigadier general if I continue to perform well. The path ahead is uncertain, challenging, demanding. But it's mine. Built on my terms, through my choices, reflecting my values. My father tried to build a legacy through control and toughness. He succeeded, but at great cost, broken relationships, missed opportunities for connection, a retirement filled with regret. I'm building a different legacy. One based on trust, analytical excellence, and mentorship. One that values people as much as mission, that sees intelligence work as vital rather than secondary, that proves modern leadership can be both effective and humane. He built a legacy of control. I'm building one of competence. And in the end, that's how you win the long game quietly, consistently, by doing the work and trusting that excellence speaks for itself. I get in my car and drive back to headquarters. There's a brief to prepare, a staff meeting to lead, an intelligence crisis somewhere in the world that will need our analysis. The mission continues. And I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Here's where I'll leave it. If you've ever had to earn respect the hard way, share your story below. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true, first-person leadership and boundary wins. Questions for you. Have you ever been publicly undermined by family or a boss? What did you do in the moment? What's harder, proving competence to strangers or to your own family? If a senior leader defended you on the spot, would you accept it or handle it privately later? Where's your line between reconciliation and moving on? What's one boundary you set that changed your career trajectory?